My name is Angelo John Lewis, and I'm the director of the Sacred Inclusion Network. What follows is an interview that I conducted with my colleague and friend, David Wetton, during the early days of the pandemic. Since then, it seems that a lot has changed and nothing has changed. Still, roughly a year after the pandemic began, for many people, it's more or less the same. People are living in lockdown in many places in the world. There's uncertainties about when schools are open and when it will be safe to travel. And so this state, which we call liminality, from David and I's point of view, is quite a big deal. We may be living in it for a long time. And that's the subject of an exploration that we'll be conducting on August 21st, 2021. So I will post the correct dates in the show notes and in the video itself. And some of the dates that you'll hear in the interview are incorrect. So without further ado, here's David.
Hi, I'm Angelo John Lewis for the Sacred Inclusion Network, and I'm here with David Wetton, who's here to talk about our exploration, which comes up on this Saturday, the 20th of March. That's called Embracing the Liminal. And I want to start, David, just by reading our description, and then I'll ask you a few questions, and that will be what we'll do. Anthropologists define liminality as a quality of ambiguity or disorientation that occurs in the middle of a rite of passage, where participants no longer hold their pre-ritual status, but have not yet begun the transition to the status they will hold when the rite is complete. During the rite's liminal status, participants stand at the threshold between their previous way of structuring their identity, their time, or community, and a new way which completing the rite establishes. David Wetton, who's going to facilitate our 20th exploration, believes we're all at this moment living in liminal space. Liminality, David said, is where we are betwixt and between, and usually therefore not in control. It's a space of emptiness and nowhere, of uncertainty and chaos. It's a place of discomfort and unrest. It's a place of challenge. Liminality is a place where previously trusted maps no longer seem to work. David, maybe I'll stop there and first of all welcome you to this little promo and I should ask you how you're doing in this unsettling time.
I'm doing well. Here in the UK, we are still in lockdown. We have various stages for coming out of lockdown, so I'm not really seeing many people at the moment, but thankfully, health-wise, I'm doing very well, thank you.
So why is liminality something for us to even talk about or think about this day and time?
Well, during this pandemic, it's my sense that we're all living in liminal space. Normally, liminal space is when an event happens. It might well be a loved one dies, you lose a job. There's something that happens that throws you into this betwixt and between space. But I think really it's a unique time in that the whole world seems to have been thrown into liminal space because the COVID pandemic has really thrown us into a space where we're betwixt and between. And I think you said in description, liminality is a place where previously trusted maps no longer seem to work. And here in the UK, there's a sense of we need a map. We want to return back to normal. But quite often liminality does not return us back to as we were before. Although here in the UK, and I think it's similar in other Western countries, we do have our roadmap. You know, our Prime Minister Boris Johnson actually set out a 4-step roadmap to get us back onto, well, return us to normal, as he said, with steps taking us right through until June the 21st. But of course, no one knows if actually these criteria will be met and what will happen. But there's a real sense that people want a guide, they want a map to help them get out of liminal space because it can feel so uncomfortable.
Now, David, I know that I didn't really introduce you properly. I know that among other things, you're an interfaith minister. And I also know that you're, a conscious coach, and you do a lot of programs for executives. I'm just wondering, from your perspective as somebody who's studied various scriptures, is there anything that various sacred books might tell us about this particular time or how to navigate it?
Well, they tell us about the time. I think I gave the example, from a Buddhist perspective. For me, the liminal space is when the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree before he achieved his awakening and breakthrough. And the key here is that he didn't know. He sat in faith, he sat in trust, but he didn't know he was going to get this awakened breakthrough. Similarly, from a Christian perspective, it could be Paul blind in Damascus waiting for return of his sight, not sure what's going to happen. From a Jewish perspective, it could be the Israelites in the desert. And quite often Abraham, who is known as the father of the three monolithic faiths, the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jewish faith, his kind of watchwords in the Bible and in the scriptures is actually Abraham was going without knowing. So in one ways, he embodied in liminal, this between and betwixt space. He didn't know what was going to happen. So as a sense, I think through all of our faith stories, there's a sense of liminal space, thinking of, again, a Christian Jewish example, Jonah in the whale. You could say the whale's belly was liminal space for him. And I think what they're trying to tell us, I think a lot of the stories in the Bible are really just stories that reflect, like that's in that culture, but in this culture, we can still relate to them. We're going through suffering, and sometimes it's suffering we can't understand. So even Job, for example, in the book, when he didn't know what we felt was being punished, he didn't know why. Some of us may be feeling this. What's happening? Why are we in these circumstances? We can't understand what's happening to us. So I think there's a lot of stories around this that really link into this. And actually, I think it's Richard Rohr, who some of the listeners may know, the sort of Franciscan priest who's in Albuquerque, who actually speaks about that actually he thinks that much, and he uses the word God, but he thinks that much of the work of God is to get people into liminal space and then keep them there long enough so they can learn something essential. And he actually calls liminal space the ultimate teachable space, maybe the only one. And although, of course, there's lots of suffering and there's bereavements, just saying today, I just had a friend that's come, wasn't particularly, well, it was perhaps partly COVID linked. My uncle, bless him, died earlier in the year through COVID. There's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of deaths. But on the other side of the liminal space as well, there may be things where actually we have learned some perhaps very deep internal, profound lessons in this liminal space. And it's a kind of thing actually that I always say you don't choose to go into liminal space, but often you're pushed into it. But upon reflection, you realize actually that it was a time of growth.
So that implies that it's not totally bad news. Yes, it's not good to be confused and not know what you're doing. So it implies that it can be a time, I guess, of creativity and rebirth.
I was going to say, absolutely. The weekend I ran a workshop for fellow interfaith ministers here in the UK, and it was on liminal space. And one of the points that was made, and I'd got a video to illustrate that, was actually liminal space being betwixt and between can absolutely be a very creative space. And I played a video of an artist who was not pre-scripted with me, but he actually said he loses himself in this creative space. He feels like he moves out of time and something comes through him, but he very much was describing a liminal experience. He says, I look back, I'm not sure how I've painted this picture. Mm-hmm. So yes, liminal space can actually be intensely creative as well. So it carries, I think, almost both poles of this polarity, if you like, this intense creativity, this sense of love, joy, and peace, and then this profound suffering and agony and even loss through death. And quite sometimes in liminal space, you're not sure perhaps whether either or both or none of them will actually emerge in the space, because it is a space of not knowing.
So we're going to get together on the 20th, and I'll post the link in the chat and the description. But I wonder, David, just in conclusion, can you give us some sense as to what we might do when we gather through our Zoom windows?
We'll dive a bit deeper as to, there are certain tools that are available in liminal space that people might be interested in in hearing about. So I will share some resources around particularly what happens in liminal spaces for those on the spiritual path who are drawn into what I call shadow work. So I'll be talking about how shadow work can thrive. We'll also be talking about some of the spiritual practices that can help us survive and thrive in liminal space. And of course, we will be talking about liminal space. Quite often, one of the things that gets mapped onto there is Joseph Campbell's, he calls it the heroes, I'm going to call it heroes and the heroines journey. We're going to be looking at those steps because his model actually does apply quite nicely to liminal space. It's not an absolute map where people know where they are, but it does give some indications. So there are certain things we can follow. And I'll perhaps be drawing on examples of people being in liminal space, such as Martin Luther King and what happened with him. He got thrown into liminal space when he got asked to take on the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association when Rosa Parks refused to move for the white passenger. So we'll be looking at it from a number of different perspectives, and my hope is that whoever is watching and listening will actually glean something to take away. And I know the interfaith ministers that I spoke with this weekend, we just said thank you very much for such a moving and insightful sharing. So we learned a lot actually traveling together in that space.
Well, some of you know that David is a longtime friend of the network. I believe it's the third time that I've imposed upon us to do something, and we're very much looking forward to having him, hosting him, and I cannot think of a more suitable topic. So this is your invitation. I'll post the link. David, thank you for giving up your time today, and we'll see you Saturday.
Will do. Take care, everyone.